Camera. Action. Worked smoothly this time. G'day, I'm Ted Jedynak. Don't worry, it's a condition I've had since birth. Nothing contagious. It's great to be back here on Facebook Live, reaching out to the global community of foot fixers who are passionate about helping more people like never before. Today is all about shortcutting your path so that you can get the gangbuster clinical outcomes that your paying clients demand of you. All right. So just a little background. I've been a health practitioner in private practice for over 30 years. And as a business owner and operator, I've established multiple centres and mentored hundreds of practitioners in business. I've also had the great privilege of training foot fixers globally for over 22 years. So if you're a physio, chiro, an osteopath, a podiatrist, physical therapist, and you're interested in fixing feet, then welcome, you're in the right place. Thanks for joining me live from my office here in South Australia. You're on Triple T TV. Great name, I reckon. So that's Ted's Tips on Tuesdays. That's when we are, and here we are on Tuesday, ready to share some tips with you. Wherever you are in the world, hola, guten tag, buongiorno, bonjour, konnichiwa, chin chin, musaka, kalimera, kawasaki. Okay, maybe I'm pushing the limits of my linguistics a little bit too far there. Hey, please say hi in the comments box below and let me know where you're from. What an auspicious day today is. Of course, it's the 4th of July. So I'd like to celebrate or join in the celebrations with our North American friends. Ready? Okay. Get it? I'm in Dependance. Yeah, I know, it seemed funny at the time when I thought of it, but here we go. Let's move forward, shall we? Today's sensational show is all about how to fix those conditions that might be giving you the shins. So, first of all, are we going to call them shin splints? No. Please type in what you call those conditions that plague the medial border of the tibia. Is it tib post tendinitis? Maybe it's a tenosynovitis, or you're dealing with a periostitis. What about the term medial tibia stress syndrome? Probably covers a blanket of conditions, I think, being a syndrome label there. Cool, okay. So now we got that sorted, that we're not going to be calling them shin splints. Let me tell you what's going to happen today. You're going to leave today's show with at least 6 tips from Ted that are simple, effective actions that you can do immediately to improve the clinical outcomes for those tib post conditions you see in your clinic. Sound good? I hope you said yes. So, to achieve great clinical outcomes for tib post conditions, we're going to focus today on the navicular. We're going to do that because of the anatomical insertion site of the tib post muscle. Now, it's important to know that if the navicular displaces or gets stuck, it can result in a stressful traction force on the tib post muscle. So please stay tuned in because I'll explain the crucial biomechanical compensation pattern a little bit later on. In fact, I'm going to walk you through the key elements of the lateral navicular mobilization so that you can get even better clinical outcomes. It's a ripper, let me tell you. This mobilization is especially useful if you have a tib post case that hasn't fully resolved. You know, the ones who they're better but not best. Well, stay tuned. I'm going to reveal all in this show. Well, as far as shins go, anyway. I'm going to introduce you to a very special guest who will be my model for the demo that we're going to do. He's very excited about appearing on Triple T TV. I can hear him there. Hey, settle. Your turn's coming. It's a few minutes, okay? Everyone wants to be a star on the show. All right. So, hey, by the way, it's great to be back in our usual time slot. Last week was a blast, but geez, tell you, doing hair and makeup every day got to be a little bit intense. We had an amazing response from dedicated practitioners all around the world to our 5 live shows that we did in 5 live days. Special shout out to John Weir over in, to be sure, it must be Ireland, who sent a message of appreciation I received this morning. Thank you very much, John. That was great. Much appreciated. Okay, so last week, we discussed curing cuboids and plantar heel pains, orthotic therapy, and manual therapies. I revealed some of the most fulfilling and even challenging cases that I've had to fix, and I've also talked about the event that changed the direction of my career. There's still plenty more to come on this show, and each week we'll be coming to you live on Tuesdays from now through till the end of the year. And it's going to be fun taking you around the world with us. It will be in Perth in August, and then our world tour through UK, Europe, through September and October. It's going to be top fun. So, all right, who's in the house today? George, you there? Manuel? Hola? Brad, you over the ditch? You coming in this way? Teresa, she's from FNQ. I'm not swearing, that's just far north Queensland. All right, so please make sure you say hi in the comments section down below and let me know where you're from. I mean, last week we had people joining us from Australia, New Zealand, Scotland, England, Singapore, Brazil, so almost had all the continents covered. And a special big hola to our Brazilian and Portuguese foot fixing family. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining me today live from here in my office in South Australia. For those of you who've just joined us, I'm Ted Jedynak, and we're here to reach out to the global community of foot fixers so that we can join forces and together take your skills to the next level. I tell you, I wish I had this kind of multidisciplinary forum when I was a clinician. It would have saved me a lot of blood, sweat and tears. And well, we've still got an opportunity for blood, sweat and tears with Penny Lee joining us. Now, as we go along, please make sure you ask any questions you like. As my students know, there are never any dumb questions, and if you're thinking of a question you're not sure about, chances are someone else is thinking that same question too. So do your colleagues a favour and enter a question into the comment section, and we'll make sure we get your questions and queries answered for you. And now, something you've all been waiting for. You can see Penny, she's definitely keyed up for this one. And that is today's hashtag show us your tips. So, all being well, there won't be any wardrobe function. You ready? You see, we live in this evidence-based scientific world and community, and I've got one big tip for you today, and that is listen to your gut. Because I tell you, the evidence is clear. If your gut's making noises, you probably need to go to the toilet. No? Nothing? Okay. All right, let's sink our teeth into today's topic. If you've just joined us, I'm Red Ted Jed, and we're chatting today about how to improve your client's clinical outcomes when it comes to the navicular and tib post conditions. I'll even show you one of the most effective and safe mobilization techniques to help you with your navicular-related and tib post conditions. The navicular mobilization is particularly useful for those orthotic cases that, maybe you've hit a bit of a plateau in their recovery and you aren't getting complete resolution. And the reason why I believe the lateral navicular mobilization is so useful for treating midfoot and tib post conditions is because the mobilization is very effective in releasing connective tissue restrictions that may be interfering with your treatment outcomes. You see, if you've got the classic, hyperpronated foot posture, where the subtalar joint and the mid-tarsal joint are functioning at their end range positions in weight bearing, this is then the perfect storm for the navicular to displace medially and plantarly, the classic navicular drop position. And if the navicular is in this displaced position for more than 6 weeks, several clinical clues will start to appear. First one is the prominent navicular tuberosity. Now, that can be aggravated by the medial border of the shoe and start to cause the formation of a bursa. And that can be incredibly sensitive and difficult to relieve. When you get this drop, the body's mechanoreceptors will then fire messages up to the brain about the displacement, and then the brain goes, well, I better do something about that, and it'll send messages to the tib post muscle to try and work harder to try and pull things back into a better position. And you then end up with overactivity of the tib post muscle, and that can lead to traction stresses at the insertion point, as well as myotendinous junction, and as well as in the belly of the muscle and the medial aspect of the tibia. This overactivity typically leads to fatigue and atrophy of the muscle, and you get the formation of trigger points, tender points within the muscle, and then you start getting microfractures of the periosteum where the tib post muscle is attached in the midsection of the tibia. No wonder this muscle can give us and our clients the shins. So, before I launch into the demo of the navicular mobilization to release the connective tissue restrictions, I want to give you some basic physiology and clinical reasoning on the treatment objectives of this mobilization. Firstly, let's remind ourselves of the universal physiological law as per Davis's law, and that is connective tissues always adapt to their shortest functional length. Yes, always. For example, condition that you see in your clinic every day, I'm sure, when we've got HAV, so we've got an abducted hallux, the tissues on the lateral side of the MP joint will adapt to their shortest functional length by tightening, won't they? Tissues on the medial side, they will be adapting to their shortest functional length, but it just end up being stretched. And it's that tightening here that then tends to keep that hallux in an abducted position. I mean, think of sedentary office workers, maybe even sedentary podiatrists who's sitting down most of the time in their working environment. When your hips are flexed, your knees are flexed, and you maintain that position for extended periods of time, what happens to your hamstrings? Well, they adapt to the shortest functional length, also known as hamstring tightening, don't they? What about podiatrists working in general treatment practice after several decades? I remember one of my lecturers and tutors in my podiatry training. He'd been in practice for over 30 years, and his whole upper body shoulder posture was very much in that forward slump position. I'm seeing it a lot with people who work at computers these days. That hunched position, you maintain that position for long enough, the connective tissues, they will shorten to their functional length, and you end up maintaining that posture. Make sense? Great. So just on that, for all of us working in and who are prone to that round shoulder position, what do you do to open up that chest posture? You can type in your answers. Let me know what your secrets are. I know for me personally, what I use is one of those long foam rollers, and I will lay on it back and to undo and open up those areas to literally undo the tightening and adapting to the shortest functional length. It's good for the body to keep it open and flexible. Now, when we get to a pronated foot pattern and the navicular displaces medially, those connective tissues are going to adapt to their shortest functional length, but which structures will be tightening up? Any guesses? You want to type in your answers? Which tissues related to the navicular will tighten up in that hyperpronated or excessively pronated subtalar and midtarsal area? Yep, you'll see them on the lateral side will actually be tightening up as the navicular heads medial. It reminds me of a client we saw, a bit of a case study for you, Yasmin. She was a lady in her mid-40s and had a sedentary job, but from a fitness perspective, she was keen to, she literally walked to and from work. It was about a 40-minute walk. She was very careful with her shoe selections because she had actually quite a prominent navicular tuberosity, and on her left foot in particular there was quite a significant bursa. And it was, interestingly, unilateral. Her symptomatic presentation was that her stress at the navicular and in the shin, the belly of the tib post muscle itself, so the shin pains that she was experiencing, would come on after about 30 minutes of walking. Now, she had orthotic therapy, and she was certainly better off with them than without them, but it hadn't fully resolved her problem. She'd also had specific tib post trigger point treatment by her physio. She would tell me that it was incredibly painful to do, but provided tremendous relief afterwards for a limited period of time. And then it was just a matter of time before the problems and symptoms came back. We did our biomechanical assessment and we found that a pronated foot pattern, and what we found was that it was leading to this medial displacement of the navicular, and the tib post muscle was working overtime trying to resist those pronatory moments, which ended up leading to micro tears of the tib post insertion at the navicular in the cuneiform area. There was bursa inflammation, and it was all incredibly tender right on the navicular tuberosity to palpate. The clinical signs were certainly consistent with traction tears of the tib post tendon attachment. She had previous bone scans, and it's confirmed concentrated areas of inflammation both at the tib post insertion site and also in the mid portion of the tib post origin. No kidding. Okay, so our goal was to release the connective tissue restrictions lateral to the navicular so that Yasmin's orthoses could have less supinatory resistance as they try to introduce their supinatory moments. Does that make sense? So if the foot's collapsing and all the tissues are adapting, you shove in an orthotic device, and what will tend to happen is that connective tissue restriction will resist that supinatory moment coming in from the orthotic intervention. So our goal and our treatment objective was to release those tissues so that the foot could resupinate more easily, so her orthoses would be more effective. That make sense? Great. So today's mobilization technique is going to show you literally how to do that, and it's a great thing to do. It's very simple to do and effective for those navicular displacement cases. When I first started mobilizations and as a therapy, I was actually using a navicular mobilization technique, which we affectionately refer to as the chicken wings, because what would happen was I would contact against the navicular, I would invert the foot, and the reason why we invert the foot is to just pull the cuboid laterally to create a bit of space or room for the navicular to be able to mobilize laterally. And to do that effectively, you had to have your wings out, your elbows out in a parallel position. And then it would be a pulsing into the navicular. It's a very effective way to be able to get the desired effect of releasing those tissues. But the downside was I have to generate all of the therapeutic force. And this requires a higher physical workload and demands on me and my body. Now, I know, if I've got a massive upper body strength, it's not so much of an issue, but for those who may be more mortally built, it takes hard work. Truth is, I always try to be lazy. So if I can do something in a more efficient manner that doesn't require as much energy and effort on my part, that's what I'm going to do. The second downside of the chicken wing technique was it takes more skill and effort to control the foot, because everything's literally sitting within your hands. So therefore the safety factor, I think, is less than ideal. And it also requires more skill in being specific in your contact point and the generation of the therapeutic force. This means we've got reduced specificity. For those of you who know what that word means, that will mean something to you. Or technically, it's reduced specificity. Anyway, today's technique, it literally evolved from an FMT training that I ran, where there were a number of, more slightly built practitioners who found working on big, burly, manly feet tough going. They were unable to generate the required force comfortably. So what we're going to do directly is we're going to move over to the demonstration area where my model has been patiently waiting. Uh-oh, and Penny has got herself very comfortable there. She's about to be disturbed. So let's move over, and I'll let you follow me and see what's going on here. Okay, Penny Lee, you found Scully. So here we have our resident in waiting, Scully, and he's just got his head laid over there. He's got something, not a piece of leather to chew on in case this is painful. And someone who's really loving Scully and become a new friend, this is Penny. Okay, so let me go through some of the key landmarks and benchmarks for you to really master this technique. The first one is the client position. Oh, careful, Scully, that's going to be incredibly delicate area there to be doing that clawing. Okay, so you can have your patient, your client, lying in a prone position, or they can be seated up. What's important is that the legs are sitting in a supine position. Then what you will need to do as a practitioner is you'll be on the lateral side, on the outside of the table, right here. Not over here, but right over here. Isn't that right? Cool. Then what's going to take place is we're going to position the client's leg. And the way we do that is we're literally going to flex the knee up, and we're going to laterally or externally rotate the leg so that the outside border of the foot is just in the position where it is resting and braced against the table. Now the contact points, the key contact point is the navicular. And you're going to contact the navicular with your contact hand using your pisiform. So it's this bone on the outside of the hand, and if you feel it right there, there's a bony prominence. You've got some muscle flesh here, but bony prominence is right there. Pisiform, for our international guests, in French, that's pisiform. If you're Italian, it's pisiform. Oh, and sorry, I forgot the Germans. Germans is pisiform. Hi. Oh no, it's Japanese, sorry. Or maybe it's pisiform. Pisiform. Anyway, my linguistics is having a little bit of trouble here. Okay, so. Oh no! You want me to mobilise you? That's not fair. So, pisiform, and watch this, flying cat. Woohoo! Yes, they always land on their feet. That's good. All right. So, place the pisiform in contact directly over the navicular. With your distal hand, what you're going to do is invert the forefoot to just help the cuboid away, as we previously mentioned. Back of your hand should be visible to you, and your thumb is against your hand. So it's not this trying to think, it'll be awkward and stress your wrist. Have your thumb here and think of motorbike revving. That's what we're going to do with the forefoot. So we'll invert the forefoot, pisiform in contact with the navicular, medial tuberosity, and then literally wrap your fingers around your other wrist, and it helps keep you in a nice, stable position. Then what's going to happen is we need to use gravity to our advantage and have the line of drive, the therapeutic force going straight vertical into the navicular to go directly laterally. So the way that happens is if you have a look at my forearm, you'll see how it is vertical. And then what I'll be doing is literally just using my upper body weight to lean into the foot and take up the tissue motion to its end passive limits. Once I'm at that end passive limit, then what's going to happen is I'm going to pulse gently at the rate of 1 pulse per second. So this is what it looks like. Take up the tissue tension, and then pulse, pulse, pulse. Oh, the signs of being ignored, huh? And just pulsing right here. How was that, Penny Lee? Good pulsing? So it's pulsing at once per second, and you're going to do a total of 10 repetitions. So what that looks like when you set up, we've got the client in the correct position, we've got foot here, we have the cat lined up, and then into that pulsing section. Keep on going, and we'll just in position, pisiform, navicular, and leaning over the top, and then pulsing. Very little effort on my part. I'm just using gravity, my upper body weight, to my advantage. All right. Then we say, thank you very much, Scully. But now, what you really need to be what you need to be aware of to master this technique are the key rookie mistakes to avoid doing so that you don't cause more harm than grief. We'll go back to my desk and I'll run through those, make sure I don't miss out anything important TED's tips on the navicular mobilisation. All right, so some adventures there. Nice. Here we go. So key rookie mistakes that typically happen with this technique, and I've got to tell you, these are rookie mistakes that I've made personally and that I've seen in over 20 years of teaching foot mobilisation techniques to students all around the world. And there are certainly some universal rookie mistakes that you want to be aware of. The first one is contact point. So you've just got to make sure that you're on the navicular tuberosity. In most feet this is reasonably obvious, but in some feet it's not. So you've got to palpate, and particularly when you put it into that supinated position that you set up on the treatment table, it tucks in and it may be hard to find that clearly. So that's rookie mistake number one, not being accurate with the contact point. The second is the speed of the pulses. So it's a pulsing at a rate of 1 per second. I don't know why, but just about everyone when they first start doing this, they start going at it like teenagers and they're going 2, 3, 4 times a second. It's like, no. Once per second, and you get the most effective mobilization effect, and it's most comfortable for your client. Also, the force. Are you applying the mobilization force at the passive limits? If you don't take up the tissue tension right to its end passive limits, what ends up happening is you work within the joint's range of motion, and it doesn't have the effect of getting those collagen cross linkages, putting them under tension to gently tear them apart and get the desired stretch happening with those collagenous tissues. The other key point to be aware of, this is not so much a rookie mistake, but it's more of something you've got to be pay close attention to, and that is if there is a bursa on the navicular tuberosity, and you start pressing on it with bone-on-bone contact, it's going to hurt. So don't do that. What you need to do is protect the area. You can just modify your contact point and just use more of the fleshy part of your hand. That's one option. However, my preferred option, what I recommend is you get some compressed felt and just cut out a donut pad and put it so that the bursa sits within the navicular tuberosity. That way, when you apply the force, it's spread over a bigger area and you avoid direct contact with the bursa. The downside of this is, of course, you're not mobilizing the navicular specifically, but what you will be doing is working on those tissues that are on the lateral aspect of the cuboid, and so you start getting that release happening to enable your orthotic intervention to work more effectively. Or maybe it's a strapping intervention, or whichever intervention you're doing to apply a supinatory moment to the foot structure. And as always, with any manual therapy technique, you need to pay close attention to your client. Good thing I like to do is look into their eyes, because discomfort is acceptable, but if it's painful, that's not acceptable. You've got to work within your client's tolerance levels. And that will vary. This is where the art of being a practitioner comes in, where what they can tolerate, and what I mean by tolerance is, on a VAS scale, if 0 is no pain, 10 is excruciating, up to about a 6.5 or 7, I think is acceptable. Beyond that, where you start seeing the other leg come around and it's going to smack you in the side of the head, I would back off the amount of force that you're applying. Okay, great. So Any questions, please type them in. I think I heard some questions coming through. Did I, Mark? Let's see what questions you might have about what I've covered so far. Okay, I see. So how long and how often do you do this mobilization for? Okay, so the key element here is we're going to work with nature and the turnover rate of collagenous cells. So the evidence tells us very clearly that it takes around 6 weeks for old collagenous cells to turn over with new healthy collagenous cells. So typically what you'll find is you'll end up doing the treatment over a course of time that will probably be around 6 weeks in total. The lion's share of those collagen cross linkages and releasing those happens within the first 3 weeks. So in that first 3 weeks, what we recommend you do is see people twice weekly for those first 3 weeks. And if you can spread it out, that is ideal, so every second or third day, to keep on getting that stretch and release over the period of time. Once you've got those connective tissue restrictions released, then it's time to focus on the tib post tendon, the muscle itself, and the myotendinous junction in between. Now, for this part of the treatment, you'll need to be clear on the assessment, the rehabilitation path, trigger points, tender points, and to do that, you'll need a tool like this. Now, good news is I'm going to dive into all of those elements: assessment, rehab, trigger points, tender points, and how to use a tool-assisted tool like this to deliver tool-assisted massage. That's what next week's show is all about. It's going to be a ripper. Hey, for those of you who've just joined us, I'm Ted Jedynak, but we can still be friends. Let me just recap what we've covered so far. We've been exploring the therapeutic value of mobilizing the navicular so that we can release the connective tissue restrictions that may be affecting our clients' navicular or tib post conditions. We've clarified why we aren't using the word or the term Shin splints. We've discussed Davis's law of connective tissues always adapt to their shortest functional length. We've explored the biomechanical compensation patterns that contribute to navicular drops and how this adds traction stresses to the tib post muscle and tendon. I did a demo of my favourite navicular mobilisation with some assistance from Scully and Penny, who just couldn't stand to be out of the action. The mobilisation technique that I demonstrated, I believe, is the safest and most effective mobilisation technique to do, particularly if you, the practitioner, are of a slighter physical build than the client you're working on. That way, you can generate sufficient force to get the desired therapeutic effect. Then I also ran through the key rookie mistakes that I've learned from teaching foot mobilisation therapies for over 20 years. Wow, we packed a lot into today's show, haven't we? So please let me know what you found most useful. Type it in the comments box. I'd love to know what's worked, what's been beneficial for you. I'd especially like to know what you're going to do in your clinic now as a result of today's show. Please type in your answers in your comments below. I promised you that we'd have at least 6 action steps that you can take from today's Triple T TV show to help with your navicular and tib post cases. I reckon we've pretty well covered that. So, key here though is to make sure you've got a copy of all of those tips. So make sure you grab your freebie of Ted's tips of the navicular mobilisation from the link in this post. So after this show, the link to the freebie will be sitting right here above my head. And as an added bonus, the freebie will also include a link to an instructional video on the navicular mobilisation technique. Plus, I've included the rookie mistakes checklist, and that will shortcut your path to mastering the navicular mobilisation. Before we sign off, if you have any questions or a frustration with naviculars and tib post conditions that I haven't covered today, put it in the comments box below. Well, maybe if you've got a suggestion that you'd like to recommend. Hey, Even if you're watching this as a replay, we check and reply to all of the comments left. So please add yours in. We'll make sure we respond. In next week's show, we're going to dive into what needs to be done once those connective tissue restrictions have been released. This is when it's time to focus on the assessment, the rehab path, and trigger and tender points. And this amazing tool is going to show you exactly how it's used as a diagnostic tool as well as a treatment tool. That's all coming up in next week's Triple T TV show. You won't want to miss it. So join me next week to fast track your clinical outcomes for tib post conditions by discovering all the tested and tried strategies that work not just in my clinics, but in clinics all around the world. We'd love to have you join us and help chew the fat together. Thanks very much for joining me today. Oh, great, Robert McDonald. I reckon from memory, you're all the way from Canada. Good to have you on board. What's your favourite way to assess for navicular needing to be mobilised? Ha! Okay, so really good question. How do you know if the bloody thing's stuck in the first place is probably what you're asking here. This comes from clinical assessments or clinical evaluations where you watch, okay, so we'll look at your gait analysis and whether you see signs of the navicular showing a lower position or navicular drop, that's a clue. When you do your range of motion study, if you go through the subtalar joint and go through the individual joints within the foot structure, a great clinical clue is when you've got the talus shifting anteriorly, and what that does is jam into the navicular, contributing to that drop. How readily will the navicular be able to resupinate or move within the talus and the cuneiform? Now, if you isolate isolate the navicular and gently mobilize it, you'll find it will move, not much, but 1 or 2 millimeters. That's a good sign there is some mobility there. If you can't get any movement here, or another clue when you're doing that test, sometimes there's a trigger point or a tender point on the plantar aspect, and you go to grab the navicular and your client goes, ow, that tells me that there's been some long-term compensation usually in the adductor hallucis muscle underneath, and that's a clue that the navicular is displaced. So probably the key thing here to also be mindful of, Robert, is that when you mobilize the joint, if there is no displacement, if the navicular is able to move, you'll feel it just slide under your pisiform, your head. It moves quite easily. But if you feel resistance, and that's when you'll know that, okay, there's limited movement there, you'll need to move it. You need to have some sort of reference point or a bank of experience that you can draw on to say, this feels more mobile than others. So if you think of it a little bit like joint mobility through the subtalar joint, when a subtalar joint has sort of free movement, or sometimes it's a bit restricted, maybe like a rigid cavus foot compared to a hypermobile flat foot, like they're kind of the two extremes. So there'll be degrees with that. If you're not used to palpating cuboids, here's a simple test or a simple action you can do, and that is mobilize or palpate and just mobilize dorsal and plantar every cuboid, so every navicular that you see over the course of the rest of the week. So if you feel 20, 30, 40 naviculars, you'll start building up that bank of experience. And then that's where it's the art of palpation, where you'll be able to feel whether a navicular is restricted or not. Clinically, though, if the client is presenting with the symptoms and the clinical indicators of tib post tenderness or tib post stress and strain, that's a pretty good clue that there's going to be some restriction there. Beautiful, great question, thank you. Hopefully that's answered and helped you out there, Robert. Anything else? If you've had anything that you have found useful or you're going to do, please make a note and a comment. If you haven't already liked this page, Foot Mobilisation Techniques, then please do so. Also, if you have a colleague who would love to get the lowdown and Ted's tips on navicular mobilisation, then download the freebie. Robert, appreciate your comments, thank you very much. Please make sure you join me next week for the Triple T TV show. I also want you to join me in sending lots of love hearts and thanks to Dr. Lil, who works incredibly hard behind the scenes to bring all of the content and the value to you together. So if you want to click some hearts on the screen, Lil will take those and I'll be sending some heartfelt thanks as well. As my mate says, Matt, over on the Gold Coast, if you want to stay ahead, catch up with Ted. So I look forward to sharing my tips with you again next week. It's been a blast catching up with you today, and I hope you've had a cracking good time. Until next week, same bat time, same bat channel next Tuesday. Take your skills to the next level and fix more feet like never before. Cheers.